Brad? It's Beth Schibley from Aging Matters in Brevard, and I'm here this morning with Brad Brewer from Legacy Kept out of Melbourne Beach, a brand new local company. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning, Beth. Good to see you.
So, this is our Aging Matters in Brevard continuing workshop caregiver videos that we're offering online for Sunflower House until we can get back into our physical Merritt Island Mall building. I'm hoping that Brad will join us in live and in person as soon as we can get back into offering services in real life. But for now, this is what we're going to be doing. So, good morning. Like I said, good morning, Brad. Why don't you start out with a little bit of an intro for us?
Yeah, great. Well, it's great to be with you, and this is a topic that is really near and dear to my heart. So I'm really honored to be able to share some of these resources for caregivers. Since March of this year, as you know, adults over 60 around the world have been advised to stay home since they're at the highest risk during this pandemic. And, that's over 72 million Americans alone. And so we who have parents and grandparents that are in that age group, or if we are in that age group, you've been presented with an unforeseen challenge during this time. That's also a unique opportunity, we think. And so we at Legacy Kept, which is the family startup and social enterprise that my wife and her father and I are working on together, we have a passion for family stories. My wife's a marriage and family therapist, so she comes at this from that angle of family intergenerational connections
Mm-hmm.
and um, and I'll share a little bit more later on my own personal connection to this work, but we are now on a mission to help other people preserve their family history and to strengthen their relationships and ultimately we'd love to see, it's a big dream, but we really want to see the generation gap in our nation bridged, that we could connect folks across generations and be better off together. So that's really I think the framework behind this idea this morning or today is to offer some resources for folks that are in a situation where they may be helping to take care of an older family member or a spouse or a partner right now. Some ways that you can really have a holistic relationship, care for not only the physical needs, but also the emotional and mental and spiritual needs that'll help you as well. It'll actually make it even uh, more. It'll make it enjoyable. It'll make it fun. It'll make it meaningful to have those conversations and those relationships. So glad to be with you and glad to be able to talk about these things.
That's great. A little quick little intro for those who aren't familiar with Sunflower House. Sunflower House is a caregiving resource center that seeks to help folks who are caring for their loved ones, their family members in their own homes, and we're part of Aging Matters in Brevard. I have to say, I think that with the most recent current stuff that's happening, Brad, I really feel like tapping into the stories of our elders is becoming even more germane, even more relevant than it was. I think some of us need to start to understand backstories and understand, just absolutely understand histories through the stories of the people we love.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, one of we have basically three main takeaways that we're hoping people that will watch this will learn. One of them is something that's probably really will resonate with everyone. It's just why the knowledge of your family roots and your family history are so essential to your own growth and to your own future and future generations. Something that we may take for granted, but in the therapy world, there's an idea of family of origin and understanding the ways in which your upbringing and your environment and your family history have a direct and deep impact on your own identity and on your own trajectory, even in life. And so we want to first kind of make sure folks understand just how important it is to have knowledge of your family history and how it helps shape your life. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We also want to cover some practical tips on, if you're interested in learning more, having better conversations right now with your loved ones, and the more enjoyable, more helpful. We want to give you some tips on how to do that well. Because there's some things, even I've learned the hard way, and some things that we've all kind of tried, and so we've got some really good helpful tips on how to ask your parents or your grandparents for their story, how to do that well. And then the third thing that we want to help people with is just to understand the benefits of specifically one particular tool that we're offering is a writing project. It's actually memoir writing made simple. And so there's some different ways that you can record the stories of your family so that they can actually be kept and preserved for future generations. So we'll bring up some of those different options and talk about the pluses and minuses of using different platforms for this. But you're right, Beth, this is timely, it's relevant. There's I feel a sense of urgency with the fragility in some ways of life right now, that it's like, hey, let's not mess around with this and regret later that we didn't take advantage of this slowdown of the world and the opportunity to connect even virtually,
Right.
whether it's video call or a phone call, and have these really important conversations.
Yeah, I agree. I think that right now the idea to take some of, we're hearing so many things in from a historical background, that are coming up in the news and in all the talk shows and everything. And to be able to directly relate that to family members who've lived through some of these challenges and get their perspective and get their, and draw out their wisdoms. And, I think really one of the things that I'm loving having conversations with like my mom and my father-in-law is where they have moved from when they were young, and when they were young as teenagers, and what life was like then, and when they were raising their families, and then as adults, and now as they're older, how to kind of talk about that in a sort of a dynamic way, because none of us are static. Our stories when we're 20 are, believe me, not our stories when we're 60. I think this is really such a perfect time. It's really and you're very right. We're using the word fragile. I think we're all feeling that way now. Physically, we're feeling fragile, emotionally, psychologically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thought it would be fun and maybe helpful to any listeners and viewers to hear about our own stories, just a little snapshot of our own journey and how this has impacted our own lives, relating to family members. So if it's okay with you, I'd love to just share briefly, and then I want to ask you a couple of questions. But just to share kind of where I'm coming from on this, I just turned 40 a week and a half ago.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you. That's a number that was sort of looming out there all, in your life. You're like, oh man, what do I, and yeah. And the other kind of wild thing is that my wife and I are having our first child, so we're so excited. She's pregnant, and, we're due, and on a Thanksgiving Day, we're due.
Wow, congratulations.
So yeah, we'll have a lot to be thankful for, God willing. And we just found out it's a boy. So there are all these like layers and dynamics that are happening in my own life right now that are really powerful symbols of thinking about legacy and thinking about generations and family. And I have become involved in this work, and I'm actually have left my job a few months ago just to pursue growing this organization, Legacy Kept, because my grandfather, who was born and raised, he was born in Georgia and spent most of his life in Florida, and graduated. He was a Gator, graduated from University of Florida, was a World War II fighter pilot, and then retired just south of Patrick Air Force Base. in Indiana, Florida, in the mid 70s. So I grew up visiting him. My dad was in the Army, and I grew up visiting my grandfather every year on vacations. And he was kind of this mythic figure for me, just this, kind of confident, loving, adventurous grandpa. And so we were really good buddies. And that relationship and that bond was very important to me. Having a consistent place to visit, and having a person that that I shared blood with. This is my grandfather, my dad's dad, and I shared a name and I shared history with. So when he passed away, I was 19 years old. He died of cancer, and that was a huge loss
Oh,
for
yeah.
me. And I know a lot of people can relate to that. But the one thing that has been incredible, like such an amazing gift that he had the foresight to give his family, is that he wrote a book
Wow.
about his life and about our family. And he started with kind of who his parents were. He was born in 1920, so he would have been 100 years old this year on Valentine's Day. But he wrote this book about his story of growing up and being fascinated by airplanes, and then getting to serve his country in World War II, and his career in the Air Force after that, how he met my grandmother, and some amazing little stories in there that bring her to life for me, because she passed away when I was 3 years old. I don't remember her, but when I
Mhm.
read these stories that he wrote, I feel like I know her, and that's a beautiful thing to have. So, I think just having the gift of that book,
Mhm.
and knowing that he really cared enough to do that work. This was in the like he was starting it in the mid 90s and just kind of typing away over the course of several months. It took him a long time to do it, but so when I found out that my wife and her father had this beautiful idea to create a website that makes it easier for people to just, all they have to do is answer interview questions really about their life. The questions are prompts for them, and then it results in a published book that we can make as many copies as people would like. I just thought, man, this is an amazing kind of dovetail of
Mhm.
my story and their personal mission, and so I just want everybody to have that option. And
Mhm.
for a lot of folks, I know they can't go back in time if they've lost loved ones, older adults in their lives. They can't go back and get those words now,
Mhm.
but if you have a living relative or a living mentor that you really love, I think asking for their story is not only a great way to honor them and honor their life, but it's a great way to make sure that you and your future family members will know them and will be able to know their identity.
I think you're absolutely right, Brad. And also, I mean, if you, for older folks themselves, to be able to write their story down, to pass that along, to be able to reflect back before they're um, before they're before that's lost. I think I've heard somewhere that people we've lost are not really ever truly gone until the last person who tells their story is gone.
Wow.
And that as long as their stories are being told, that they still are with us. And I think
Yes.
that this is a way to be able to show and to help pull that, just like you were saying with your grandma. I was my story, so my story,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I was very lucky to have my mom and dad married very young, had my sisters and I before my mother was 21. And
Wow.
my grandma was very young at that time. My mom's mom was so my grandmother was a grandmother at 40, and my mom was a mom at 20.
Wow.
So yeah, so and my great grandparents. So I grew up knowing, and my great grandmother was a great grandmother at 60. So the idea of having stories, I was blessed enough to have known my great grandparents, my children were blessed enough to have independent memories of their great grandparents. I So growing up, so here's kind of my story and why this really so resonated with me. I mean, you and I talked about it briefly. So I wanted to show you. This is the book that my dad and I worked on, and
Wow.
it's mostly just, well, actually, the stories are the book. My son took it, and because we did this book back in the mid 1970s, back when the Alex Haley Roots program miniseries was on, which forever ago, which really kind of inspired my dad. And we typed it all. He was asked his aunts and uncles, or his aunts, about their stories, and would cue them with pictures. And talk about, who is this person in this picture, and who is this, and tell me about this person. And then he would come back and he would relay the stories to me, and I would type them out. And then we put them in these old, very nasty, peel it back photo albums along with the pictures. And my son recently, within the past few years, took that all and put it in an acetate-free environment. But there's stories in there. It is a lot of pictures and some of that, like, traditional genealogy of who's who,
Yep.
And when they were born and when they passed away. But there's stories with them, and that's the piece that is so fascinating for me, And I do think that, now when I read it, I realize that, all of our stories are told through our own lenses. So
Yes.
that my aunts and my dad's great aunts and folks have, they come at it with their own biases. So it's not, it's not, on stone tablets. But I kind of think that adds to the humanity of it too, So I'm really fascinated to have, but to learn more about being able to do this in more of a focus of the written story memoir. So
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at the huge industries around ancestry and family trees and even DNA, those are really big, multi-billion-dollar industries. People have a fascination with understanding where they came from, and I think that that's great. There are some limitations to what you can get when you find out, for example, the name of a great 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 grandfather or grandmother and where they lived and when they were born and died. That's really cool and really can be powerful information to know. But like you said, it's the context of their lives and the stories from their own perspectives. What was it like for you to grow up in the Great Depression, or what was it like for you to whatever, fill in the blank, to
right.
have it in their own. Go
And
ahead.
my great grandmother, I find out that she, back, very long time ago, it was very unusual for women to go all the way through high school. So my great grandmother on my father's side, she wound up working in I'm originally from upstate New York, and she wound up working for a family member in Buffalo, and she was like 13 or 14. I mean, how do you tell me about what that's like to go through your early teenage years working, 40, 50 hours a week, and then coming home and giving your money to your mom and dad, to be able to support the family. I mean, what does that, what is that like to live through,
Right. And having that conversation, asking that question, and then being able to have it captured in a form that can be preserved and shared with future generations has this double powerful impact. The conversation itself, for maybe it's a triple impact. The conversation itself benefits the older adult who gets to recount and realize, maybe for the first time, some of the resilience or
Mm-hmm.
strength that they have gained through living in difficult times or accomplishing certain things in life, and that just by prompting that reflection, their well-being can be improved, and their sense of purpose in life, which is so huge for people, especially older adults that may be starting to wonder, all right, so what did I really accomplish here? Like what's this all for? So you get to help them go through that journey, that can be so helpful, and overcoming doubts or fears or uncertainty. For the listener, for the younger adult, when you learn those things about your parent or your grandparent, there can be this new compassion or new empathy, and maybe even some understanding that had caused division before it was there. If there was I often tell the story of how, I've been pretty hard on my own dad for some of the choices he made in his career. And it wasn't until starting this legacy project that he'd shared how he felt as a high school senior in 1968, knowing that if he didn't join ROTC and go to college, he was getting shipped out to Vietnam.
Right.
And those were his options. All of a sudden, all the dreams he had had about who he would be and what he would do because of what was happening in the world, his options went like this.
Right.
And hearing that story, I said, man, I'm sorry. I've been really hard on you. I've been critical,
Mm-hmm.
but how would I have felt? And so, now that I'm in these different interesting, crossroads of career and life and fatherhood, uh, I told my wife just yesterday, I said, you know what I realized as soon as you told me we're having a son? Well, a couple minutes later, I was so excited, but a couple minutes later, I thought, my life will be judged by my son. Like he will at a certain point look at me and say, I don't like how you did that, or I do like how you did that. And so these are just fascinating, but it's the stories that we might share that can lead to some understanding and some healing, perhaps, or some repair of relationships that can be so powerful. And then in future generations get to read about those stories and get some respect and some, like, wow, how did you do that?
Well, some validation,
Yeah.
some validation, and you're right. The idea that folks you can absolutely, yeah, you can validate. Wow, Grandma, I didn't realize that this was. I think it's now it's gone out of my head. Someday I was going to say something profound. It'll either come back or it won't. Oh, I know, I did come back. The idea that I think it's one of the things I really think it's cool about memoir writing specifically is that it takes those stories, and by putting them in the written form, it kind of moves it one half a block off of having to have those. You can read at your own pace, you can absorb it, you can sit with it for a while, and it can both deepen the emotion and also kind of give you the space to come to terms with some of the stuff. Because my guess is if this is done, if I were to be able to do this well, that it wouldn't all be great, fun, happy stories. There would be stories that would be difficult to maybe say to your child, or to say to you, the difficult parts of it. If you wanted to be able to go there, that would be a really a neat way to be able to say, here, I can't tell you this out loud, but to my grandchild, or something you might be able to say it to your kid, but you might not want to say it to your grandchild, but you might want him to know it. Does that make any sense?
100%, 100%. Yeah. Writing gives you that space and that little bit of distance to really ponder and reflect and put something down. And in our system, it's a typed project. So, I think in the old days, you might handwrite it, and then you might think, I don't want to say that, and you have to cross it out or start over again. Now you can just sort of delete and rewrite however you want. But yeah, it's such a powerful process for people, and there's a lot of research around the positive mental health impacts of life review and reflection writing. So it, even as an activity, I think you had said this, even as an activity for an older adult to be going back and thinking through things that they've accomplished, things they've overcome, lessons they've learned is helpful in and of itself. It's helpful just for that person, but also, of course, for those who would get to learn about their life and understand them better going forward.
Right.
So
I look at journaling as sort of a conversation with myself.
yeah,
Not necessarily that I want anybody else to do, but memoir reading is really, an outward expression of my memoir writing is really an outward expression of that. It isn't just for me. That's just gonna, get locked up and stuffed in the sock drawer.
totally. So my wife challenged me to write my own story down. If I'm going to be, selling this and telling other people they should do it,
Good
I
for
should
her.
experience it. So I've started that process for myself. And I was recently reading a section of what I had written to my mom and dad who live in Virginia. And it was a section where I talked about the bond I had with my grandfather, which was very different than the relationship my dad had with his own father. Like, this is often the case where, my dad's experience of his dad was very different than mine.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and, my dad knew a very stern, very, busy, career focused man that I never knew. I knew grandpa who, was fun loving and retired and had softened by life and had just kind of gotten to that phase. So what I wrote and just kind of in my stream of consciousness as I was writing my memoir was, I'm not sure which is the greater love, the fact that I had this beautiful bond with my grandfather, or the fact that my own dad didn't spoil that for me or
Mm-hmm.
poison my view of his dad, which was very different from mine. And I read that to my dad and my mom, and we all were crying just
Oh, wow.
because it was this revelation for me of like, wow, my dad could have been really, harsh with like, well, you don't know that,
Mm-hmm.
your
Right. Not
grandfather.
the guy you
But
know. I
right,
don't know who
right.
this
And
guy
so,
is, but that's not the guy I grew up with.
yeah, and that actually had been a point of tension with us for a long time, but as an adult, but so it really is like, and I share these anecdotal pieces just to say that, for our listeners or viewers, we get that relationships are hard and family relationships are messy. Um, but so we want to offer some tips for how you might be able to engage with someone that you're caring for, and to do that in a way that brings life and brings, healing and brings joy to you. So that's really what we're trying to talk about. um,
Cool.
um, so those were, we kind of wanted to give you some backdrop for the setting for this conversation and share each of our stories. If it's okay, maybe I'll share my screen and we can.
Sure, that's great.
Okay, so we'll start going through some of the practical things you might want to do to engage. All right. So what we're going to talk about is really some practical steps for first having a vision for this, for your relationships, um, and then how to ask the right questions, and how to talk about that, and then turning it into hopefully a project that lasts. So,
Wait a minute.
so
I wish I could figure out how to do this part. And they're going to have to hold on. Okay, well, we had to take a little break there so that we could actually, do some technical stuff because, I wish I had a 14-year-old boy in my room with me, but my grandson's only 8 and he's up in New England, so he's not going to be as much help as I'd like. Although he probably could have done this better. But thanks everybody for understanding the little glitch. So Brad,
sure.
you've got your screen shared.
Oh yeah, good. So here's our fun, our partnership here. So pleased to be able to join together and work with Aging Matters and with this topic here. But really, we wanted to give some very basic overviews. If you like what you've heard, and you're thinking, all right, maybe I'm bored with the same conversations I'm having every day or it's just talking about what we're going to eat for dinner, or what we're going to watch on Netflix tonight. You know, it's like there's an opportunity here for some deeper purpose. And we know you'll have to come up for air. We're not suggesting that, you know, this is all you talk about going forward, but certainly this could be a new thing that you want to introduce in a structured way into your relationships as a caregiver. So the first thing that we recommend was it's good to have a vision for these relationships. What would feel great to you if it was true? That you get along, that you understand each other, that you laugh, that you know. So having a vision for that. We're going to talk about how to ask questions that draw out great stories. And you know, everybody knows, you know, don't ask yes or no questions because you're going to just get very short answers. But we'll talk about how to ask better questions, and then how to make this a project that lasts. So, in terms of sharing your vision, I think that there might be some help if you actually set a goal and call this a project. People understand projects. And so if you say, hey, I'd love to do a life review kind of family stories project. Would y'all want to do that? Invite your family into a story, a project that you will work on together. Everybody loves to be part of a great mission and a great, exciting, you know, project. So if you can kind of, yeah, exactly.
Give it a, yeah.
Give it a name, make it a real project. And then make sure that you communicate your motives. I think that as I've talked with some people about this, even my own dad hesitated to start writing his story. I think that for a lot of folks, there can be an insecurity about their life. Um, there can be a genuine humility. They would say, "Oh, you know, I haven't done anything worth writing about. I haven't done, you know, I'm not a public figure." And so you really want to be very clear and tell them, hey, look, this isn't an investigatory journalist trying to get you and find out the dark and dirty, you know, secrets of your life, or to make you look bad in any way. This is actually what we want to do here is honor your life. And we want to honor how you've impacted us and how you've impacted the world so that we can understand you better, and so that our kids and our future generations can know you. We want to know you. So will you do this project? Sometimes it just takes, you know, a direct ask
Right.
where they understand that you really want this. I had to tell my dad, like, I need your story. And so I want it. Like, you have to be, you know, you have to be bold to overcome some of the objections sometimes, or the hesitation. So communicate your desire to honor their life. And then the third one was create a sense of urgency. So why do this now? Well, you don't want to be a fear monger, and we're not suggesting that at all, to like dangle the risks of the pandemic, for example, with why we should do this now. But at the same time, people typically, at least I typically, really change or move unless I'm forced to, unless there's some like compelling thing that's just like, okay, I need to change or I need to move. And so there's got to be a sense of urgency, because this is kind of it's a project that requires emotional labor and thought and time. Why do we want to do this? Why do we want to do it now? And why do we want to, what's the end result that we're aiming for? I asked one couple near the beach. They were walking off the beach. They must have been in their 70s, and I just got brave, and I interrupted them, and I said, "Excuse me, can I just ask you a quick question? Have you ever thought about writing a book about your life?" And they started laughing, and they said, "No, we're having too much fun sitting on the beach and just doing what we want to do." And so, okay, that's fine, thank you, and I let them go. And then I realized that was the wrong question to ask.
Really?
Yeah, that was the wrong
question.
Nobody wants to write a book.
Right.
I mean, maybe like there are a couple people that would like, yeah, I've thought about writing memoir, but most people think it's just this huge, overwhelming project that they wouldn't want to spend the time to do. So then another time I asked a different couple, Um, would it be helpful to you or interesting to you if you had a book that was written by a great grandparent or a parent or an older adult in your life? Like if you had access to something that they had written down, would you want that? Would you like that? Yeah, absolutely. I would want that.
Hmm.
And so there's just a framing of it, of the opportunity, that you have to be kind of wise as you approach. And so,
Hmm.
now I first get people to have a vision for having this.
Hmm.
Um, and there's not anybody I've talked to that has said, that's a horrible idea. I don't want to have, the stories
Right.
or the life. I mean, some folks definitely have a tough story, but even for them, it's like, wow, we need to talk about how life was hard and how we got through it. So I'd say, make sure that there's a sense of urgency around the project. Like why start it and why finish it?
Hmm.
Maybe it's that you want to have your book finished by the holidays so that you can give.
Maybe November for your family. I can think of some things that might be happening at Thanksgiving time for you. there's the
Totally.
sense of there's the sense of urgency for the Brewer family. I think
It
very much
is.
the birth of the next generation. You know,
Right.
and so I just want to bop in for a little bit here. So tell me a little bit more about this baby Brewer. Do you have? Is he going to be? One of the first grandbabies, or are there other grandchildren? Do you have siblings or your wife?
I have a sister who has two daughters, beautiful daughters, and so my nieces are so fun, and they live up in Virginia near my parents. But this will be the first male child.
First grandson. That's huge.
So we announced it to my parents the other day. My dad was actually in the hospital for something, and he's okay, but he was in rough shape there for a little bit, and so we were able to give him the news that he was going to have a grandson when he was there, and that just kind of changed everything. Everybody cried again. We cry a lot, and
Yeah.
and so yeah, it's a special thing that's going on.
So there's your sense of urgency. I mean, I think
Yep.
everybody can kind of relate to that. And what a gift, that's really neat. To think about it being in terms of would it be helpful to have that yourself, and then it's a short jump to looking at that as a gift to the generations that come after you.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. I was talking with the chaplain at a hospice in this area, and she said that when she became a chaplain and she, for hospice care, she thought, I think probably what everybody's big question is around what's going to happen to me when I die. Like
Mhm.
that was her assumption. But she said, what the number one question that people ask when they're dealing with that processing of a terminal illness, what's
Mhm.
going to happen to my family?
Right. Right.
There's the primary interest is, have I done all that I can do to
Yeah.
set my family up for success, to create an environment for them to have a good life, to be
Mhm.
happy, to be healthy, to have opportunities. We all want that. And there's so many people that are planning their financial legacies or their estates, or they're doing different things right now to be able to pass down. So I talk about legacy kept as a different kind of treasure
Mhm.
that you want to make sure you're leaving behind for your family, and set them up for success by having the knowledge of their own history and having the knowledge of the stories that they will absolutely treasure having. And so yeah, that idea that you can do a project now that will be a gift to others. Do it for them. You don't just, if
Right.
you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for them. Yeah. So and then here's just kind of a fun one. How to ask questions that draw out great stories. The easy tips are, maybe do a little planning, a little prep work,
Okay.
and think about what do you want to know. And thinking back through the decades might be an interesting thing. Like, so what was happening in America, or what was happening wherever they were living. And a lot of folks, were born or had lives in different countries before they came here. And so, wow, what was that like? Maybe ask their story. Okay, when you were my age, what were you doing, or what was life like?
Right.
And what did you think about your career? Now we have those questions. If people want them like preset, we in Legacy Kept has 30 preset questions in different categories. So,
Mhm.
that would be an easy way to come up with some questions. But otherwise, just write them down. What do you want to know? And then kind of make a plan for asking them perhaps a question a week. We have a really neat family that just finished their Legacy Kept project. It was a grandson who would call his 92-year-old grandmother who lived in Kansas. He'd call her every week. They had a date, a phone date. And he'd call her every week and he would ask her the next question in Legacy Kept. And while she would talk, he would type. And they just finished. And so we've sent their book off to be published now, and it should be arriving tomorrow. So we're all excited. Different ways to do this. You can either write it yourself or you can do it as a family project. And so that's where, we mentioned scheduling regular interview dates. Maybe you want to do this once a week. If you've got brothers and sisters, loop them in. Say, hey, we're all going to take turns asking mom and dad a question or asking grandma a question. And that way we all get to contribute to this project together. And then, and the last one, asking follow-up questions if answers are brief. That's certainly helpful to just know that you probably are going to have to do that. For example, our first question on the website is, what are some of your earliest memories? Now, if you go back and think about that for a minute, earliest memories, okay, I was on a playground somewhere or I was doing something. But it might be the follow-up questions like, yeah, okay, and so what was happening in your family around that time? Like, did you have older brothers or sisters, or did you, so asking follow-up questions can draw out better stories so that you don't just get like one sentence answers for all these things. So, and then, really our last tip was to make sure that you make this a project that lasts. Like Beth said, when you, if you want to be remembered, the oral history is certainly one way to do it, and just hope that, that the generations that follow will remember the key stories about your family. But that's kind of risky. And I would rather make sure that my stories are preserved, our family stories are preserved. So there are different tools for that. You may want to just kind of hit record on your phone and have interview conversations and do it with audio. You may want to do a series of video calls. Now these great technological tools, you can do it on Zoom or do it wherever. But I think Beth and I would both, make an argument that while those are great ways to do this, there's certainly a special layer of impact and of potential when it becomes a written word project. And you can even transcribe, potentially into writing something that you might record. You can do that on the website. It's a voice to text option where you can kind of record audio if you want, but just gotta make sure that you proofread, because that's not a fail-proof system. But having, the fact that I can go to my bookshelf and grab the book off the shelf and look up where my great grandfather had his business, and and think about that, or read my wife the story of whenever my grandmother put a stake in the ground for when they were building their house in Indialantic, Florida, and she said, "This is where I want the kitchen window to be so I can see the water," and they moved the stake 10 feet. Did I tell you this story?
No, I'd love to hear it.
So apparently the builders came back and they moved the stake, a few feet in their plans. And my grandmother, who was like 5'3", 100 and nothing, like moved the stake back to where she had it and put a note on it that said, "This is not to be moved again." And she was
Sounds like a Spitfire.
A Spitfire, totally. And but also the most loving and kind woman as well, from the stories my dad shares and my grandfather would share. So it paints this nuanced picture in my mind.
Was the window there?
100%. 100%.
You can see out of it at 5'3".
That's where it was, and that's where it stayed. And so I read that story out loud to my wife, because she had just done something really similar that made me crack up laughing, where, you know, she is an incredible woman, but she's so strong. And she, when she wants to be, she's pretty fierce. And so I said, oh, you got to hear the story. Now, the fact that I could go to my bookshelf and read that to her, and we can now have a sense of, you know, for whatever reason, how the Brewer men and, you know, the different women that we've chosen as our mates are fierce women, and we love that. Like, they're powerful women, and we want to honor that. Like, that's a really neat thing to know. And so I think the written word, I'd be an advocate for making sure you get these stories in writing, as I can picture in my mind, even though I didn't know her. And, you know, I know some folks do like a video recording of a grandparent, and they interview. It may be not a very huge point, but when I read stories of my grandfather and fighting in World War II, or that time in life, I'm able to envision a young man and a young woman that are, you know, kind of dealing with life in those days. And so there's just something different about just kind of the imagination that you can have when you're reading the written word, as opposed to watching, like, if I had to like fast forward and just watch an older man sort of at the end of his life recounting these stories. Both would be special, both would be, you know, important. So I'm not saying don't do video projects or don't do audio projects. There's just something kind of neat about being able to read back in a different era. Does that make sense?
I think when you as you move forward with your son, it's fun. One of the things that I found really kind of fun about hooking, you know, the history and family members, and then being able to see it in my children, is sort of like, you know, we've all heard the story, you know, the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree, or we know where that came from, or you've got your grandfather's, you know, you've got your grandma's pluckiness, or, you know, we don't have to worry about her having a voice because she got that from her grandma, you know. So I think that it's really neat. And then also to have it in the written word, you know, to have it as a physically a written word, a book. You know, I guess because of, you know, where I am in my generationally, I have to say I love the fact that so much stuff is digital now. I love the fact that, you know, I can just go in and grab it off my computer, and I have all the, you know, and it's time stamped, and I don't have to worry about what. But there is something that's lost with having things be solely digital.
Yes.
You know, sometimes to have that physical picture or that physical book, and I've read ebooks, and but turning the pages and physically having it and being able to give this physical thing to somebody that is going to move forward. I mean, I have, you know, like here's a dirty little secret. I got stacks of VCR tapes in my closet that if our ancient 1980 something VCR ever goes, we're really in trouble, you know, because, right. You know, some of it's about the platforms. Some of it's about the digital platforms, and about how, you know, well, we all thought that, you know, the cassette tape recorders were going to be, you know, when you put it on that, and it's going to be forever. Well, those things degrade. And, you know, the VCRs, same sort of thing. You know, if the platform goes away, you know, I don't know. You know, I'm sure you're way too young to remember 8-track tapes, but it was a thing. So to have a physical book and know that, and I just worry and I wonder how many things that are meant to be sort of permanent now that are in that digital cloud world are actually going to stand the test of time, you know, hundreds of years. I mean, you can pick up, you know, I can't because I'm not in that tax bracket, but you know, you could pick up a Gutenberg Bible, right? You know, and you could say, yes, this was printed, you know, 600 years ago, 700 years ago, you know, but And I don't know that that's going to be the case moving forward unless we constantly are updating these things. And this is a physical book.
Yes. Oh, that's such a huge point. And I've been saying timeless meets tech with Legacy Kept, because you get to use the advantages of modern technology to type out and update and change and save
Right.
your work. So you don't have to just do it with a quill. What was the old feather pen, like in the old days, and the like cross through.
I'm not that old.
But we talked to a guy who said, "Oh man, I've been trying to handwrite my own memoir for years, and I'd always think of a new thing that I meant to put in there, and I'd have to draw arrows and lines through stuff." So using technology, the best of technology right now to make this a simpler project is certainly an advantage. But then you have the bonus of having that timeless printed book as well, and you can make as many copies as you want. So, I think in the stores you can find similar ideas where it's maybe 101 questions to ask your grandmother, and she's supposed to get in there and fill out, what's my favorite color, and some of that stuff. But the challenge with that is you might do that project and be done, and you'd have one copy of what you did written by hand. So we like the idea that people can get on to Legacy Kept, answer these questions, and then if they have 15 grandkids, just print 15 books and you've got it covered, and if you want to add another chapter later, get back on and add a chapter. If your grandkids are like, actually my birthday is on July 18th, not the 17th. Oh, we gotta. So you get the idea. It's really a neat combination of using modern technology that makes it simple to get your story down, but then the end result is both. You have access to an ebook with ours, at least, and so I'll just go ahead and give this. The website is legacykept.com, and so people would have access to an ebook that can be read on a Kindle or an iPad and shared digitally, and so that's kind of a given that comes with the account. And then if you want to get printed books, hardcover books, you can do that as an extra deal. So, and we are really, we tried to price in terms of Legacy Kept specifically, we tried to price it at a very affordable rate. So, even though we're talking about an extremely valuable, like how do you put a price tag on the one-of-a-kind story of your own family? But in terms of accessing the site and having your own account, it's just a one-time fee of $50 to be able to have your own site. And it's all encrypted and secure and private. And so for $50, you get that with an ebook, and then printed hardcover, custom printed books would be an additional $50 each. If you want to buy those in advance, you could actually get 10% off using this code. My last name is Brewer, and so we've got this gift code is Brew if you want to get on legacykept.com and order a book. But whether you use Legacy Kept or some other platform, this isn't just a commercial for us. We just want we want you to do this project.
Yeah, I think that's the takeaway, and I thank you very much for letting us understand specifically about Legacy Kept's pieces, because I think that there might very well be folks that would like to be able to do it that way. But I think that the takeaway is think about moving it in that direction. Think about it being a written story, and I think that I really like the idea of this being a generational thing. When I was talking with you, Brad, about before about my father and the Roots book, when I had my children, that was a time where I was really into going back to that with my book. At that time, my father's conversations with his great aunts had already passed away. But then I was able to go back through, and that also lent itself to my husband and me doing this conversation with my father-in-law, so we could pull in the stories of their side. And then Since then, my children who are now adults and have children of their own, my son Adam has been very into that piece. And so he's been pulling in stories of his own. And I think that a lot of the genesis of that was when he had his children. So I think that not only can this be the idea of memoir writing and specifically in the format of legacy kept, but also the ability to be able to take that gift of and move that forward too. So this is something that if it interests you, then it very well might interest your children. You know, I mean, when my father started this project with his family, and then that really was an interest for me, and then because it was an interest for me, now it's an interest for my son. And we all have different questions that we ask in a slightly different way, and it's expanding out. You know, because when my father did it with me, we were interested in my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family, and that's where that sat. And then I got married, and we moved it into the Schibley side of the family somewhat. And now that my son's married and have children, and I can see where they might very well be doing this with the Ross. So it's just this ever expanding gift.
Totally.
Each generation afterwards, you know.
Yeah, and that actually, thank you for sharing that, because it reminds me, my father-in-law, when he's a software programmer, so he's the one that built the site and coded it all. It's like solid, and one of the ideas he had was to give people the ability to connect their own legacy story with family members.
Mm-hmm.
So you can actually have different family members who have accounts and write their own story. And then connect them together, read each other's stories. You can,
very cool.
You can merge stories into one volume if you want to do that. And then the idea is really over multiple generations, you could actually see we call it the legacy tree. So instead of a family tree that just has names and dates of birth, born here, passed away here, here's the name, that's a family tree. The legacy tree would have the stories connected to each person that someone could access. We're dreaming about 100 years from now, my grandson or great grandson being able to get online and click on my name and read my story, and click on my wife's name and read her story, and click on my son's name and read his grandfather's story. So there's just an amazing potential here. And I know that's a huge dream, a huge vision, but I think it starts with what you're saying. Like, just inviting someone into that project, into that story, can spark so many questions and curiosity about life. And we just want people to know that there's this option out there, so they don't feel limited to the family tree side or the DNA side or a photo. One of my great friends that lives nearby, grabbed his book from his dad. They collected a bunch of medals and old photos, and he showed it to me, and almost with tears in his eyes, he said, the problem with this is I don't know what any of this is for. I don't know who these people are, and I don't know where these medals came from, because we don't have the context, and we don't have. And
you don't have the why.
Yes.
So you don't have the story. Literally, you don't have the story that went with this. So yeah. So here's this ribbon with this piece of metal attached to it, and I kind of get what it means because I can look it up. But what happened?
Right.
Where does this move?
Right.
And, yeah.
Yeah. How did he feel?
Yeah, and this is very much can very much honor our folks that I don't think as a generation. I mean, I don't think that we honor the generations the way we should. I think that there is, many things that talked about this society being really hyper youth focused, and that's a good thing. I don't want to take anything away from the young folks out there. I think they're doing some amazing stuff, but I think there's something lost when you don't honor the elders and all of they can give to us, and all and that wealth, and possibly somewhere we might be able to maybe skip a few mistakes if we don't, if we could actually learn from some of them that have already been made, instead of being doomed to repeat them. You know,
Yes. Oh my
uh,
gosh. That
yeah,
is so huge.
you know, it is huge. So, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, one of the questions I had, and I'm kind of backing up here. So when you're asking, you know, and this is kind of a really pragmatic question, Brad. If I was going to do this, would you suggest, you know, do this, you know, kind of chronologically or episodically, or you know, I mean, there's so many different ways that you could come at this. You know, I mean, my father could, you know, I could talk to my mom and we could talk about different people and go through that generation of that, go through that life of that person, or we could put it in context chronologically. Is there a suggestion that you have when you're writing stories as to how to, you know, how to physically, how to break out the stories?
Yeah, well, so the way we structured the question prompts in Legacy Kept was it starts chronologically with early life and then adulthood, and then it gets a bit more categorical. There's a section for the relationships that were the most important to you. There's a section for your career and the type of like jobs and work that you did and what you feel about those. And then there's a section on like faith and values. So what were the values that you wanted to pass down to other people? And each of those sections has a set of questions. It's fully customizable. So if you don't like a category, you can get rid of it. If you don't like a question, you can get rid of it. But it's intended to be a prompt. And I think that most people that think about a memoir or think about an autobiography would naturally start, you know, with their early life and kind of chronicling that. And so that's what we did. But you don't have to. When I write, I'll get on the website and I'll just sort of ask myself, what do I want to write about today? What do I feel like? Because it is an emotional thing. If you've been going through the early life section and that was a particularly challenging time in your life and you just want to, you know, put that on pause for a little bit and go over to one of the highlights of your marriage or of being a parent, then you can skip around. But there, at least in our system, it's 30 questions. And so you could really do a blitz and say, all right, let's do a question a day for the next 30 days and be done with this project in 1 month. And that maybe if you've got the time and if you've got the energy and the willingness to do it, if it's a caretaker situation where, hey, every day we spend a couple hours together and we're, you know, typically watching TV or we're, you know, just kind of talking about whatever. What if we just add a question a day and we worked on this project? Maybe you want to do it once a week if
Right.
it's that kind of situation. So it really does depend on what your situation is. But yeah, I'd say, you know, really getting a sense of as if you're going to interview someone about their life, um, having there be enough guidance, at least a structure that you can choose from. Give them a menu of options, so to speak.
Right.
Like, so, hey, what do you want to talk about today? Do you want to tell a story from, you know, what you used to do as a teenager for fun, or do you want to talk about, you know, how you met your spouse,
Right.
and then whatever they're feeling that day. You know, one of the great things that we heard happening with a current customer is he was asking his father-in-law's, he was helping his father-in-law write his story. And at first, the father-in-law was resistant to the idea. But after a couple of sessions where they would sit and talk, my friend Rob walked into the living room and Ed, who's the father-in-law, was sitting watching TV. And Rob said, Ed, do you feel like, you know, talking about your legacy right now? Do you want to do that? Immediately, this 84-year-old man sat up straight, turned off the clicker, and said, "Yeah, I'm ready. I want to talk about my life."
Why
You know,
not?
so
Yeah,
at
that's
first
great.
people feel resistant, but when you give them the option, like, do you want to keep watching Price is Right, or do you want to like do something that's really meaningful and that really kind of is a special project? So anyway, I can go on forever with these stories.
That's spectacular. That's great. Yeah. The yeah, that's just wonderful. I'm um I'm so happy that you and I got to spend some time together today to talk about this project. I hope that we will be able to, like I said at the very beginning, that at some point, Brad, you'll be able to come down and do sort of this thing in person. at the Sunflower House, which again is in Merritt Square Mall, just up the road a bit.
Yep.
So I thank you very much, and I think we're ready to go.
Excellent. Thanks,
I'll
Beth.
talk to you later. All right. Bye bye.